अच्छा, उनके साथ, yes, yes, I was with her in a discussion very recently.
Yes, sir. Yes, yes, sir.
I was with her in
I
a
did my
discussion
MPhil
very
on
recently.
Maulana Azad, his role in Hindu-Muslim unity, where I was having a chapter on Partition of India. You know his role.
जी
And I
जी,
did my regional talk.
वाह जी वाह, वाह जी वाह.
I'm working on Dogra history, sir.
Sorry?
I am working on role of Muslim leadership in Jammu
Oh,
during the
lovely.
Dogra role.
ठीक है, great. That sounds great.
हेलो प्रोफेसर अहमद.
हाँ जी, कैसी हैं आप?
जी बिल्कुल ठीक सर. आदाब. कैसे हैं सर आप?
मेहरबानी जी, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया.
बहुत शुक्रिया सर फॉर ज्वाइनिंग अस. वी आर
My
रियली
pleasure.
ग्रेटफुल.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Please give us a few more minutes, sir. We are seeing a very heavy downpour today. So a lot of people are experiencing network issues. So please bear with
I
us
know.
for a few minutes.
It seems, yeah, it seems. कोई नहीं, I am here now.
Arpita, where is Moin? Is he around? I don't see him here. He hasn't joined.
Ask him. I'll ask him where is he. Ma'am, actually, Ishtiaq sir was asking the mode of language, like English or Urdu.
We're fine either way, sir. We have a mixed crowd. So अगर आप उर्दू और इंग्लिश का मिक्सचर बोलेंगे तो I think that will be better for us.
लेकिन मेन जुबान तो अंग्रेजी होनी चाहिए. अगर आपके लोग ऐसे
जी.
हैं जो उर्दू या ये समझते ही नहीं, हिंदी नहीं समझते, ऐसे भी तो है ना आपके.
ज्यादा नहीं होंगे सर इतने ये वाले लोग. ज्यादातर लोग are very comfortable with हिंदुस्तानी, तो हम उसमें ही बोल सकते हैं.
ठीक है, तो फिर आप बताएं अंग्रेजी में बोलें या हिंदुस्तानी में, ये मुझे बता दो, क्लियर कह दो.
अर्पिता बताओ क्या करें, हिंदुस्तानी में बुलवाएं, मजा आएगा.
हिंदुस्तानी में बुलवाते हैं.
ठीक है, आज हिंदुस्तानी में हो जाए सर.
चले हिंदुस्तानी में, उसमें अंग्रेजी की तो मदद चाहिए होती है ना, कॉन्सेप्ट्स और वो सारे उसमें से हैं.
जी.
ठीक है,
वो तो ऑटोमेटिकली इंटरस्पेस हो जाएगा सर.
लेकिन यही है कि जो हिंदुस्तानी नहीं समझते वो हमारी डिस्कशन से बाहर रह जाएंगे. ये आप लोग रिस्क ले रहे हैं, मैं नहीं ले रहा.
जी सर, आई थिंक वी आर प्रिपेयर्ड टू टेक दैट रिस्क, क्योंकि बहुत कम ऐसे लोग होंगे हमारी गैदरिंग्स में जो हिंदुस्तानी नहीं समझते.
अच्छा, बस ठीक है, मसला हल हो गया. आप क्या पढ़ाती हैं रोमा?
सर मैं मिडीवल इंडियन हिस्ट्री पढ़ाती हूँ.
अच्छा.
मुगल्स 18th सेंचुरी दिल्ली पर मेरा काम है, लेट मुगल पीरियड ऑफ हिस्ट्री.
आई सी.
जी.
वाह जी वाह. तो आपने उनसे भी राब्ता होगा आपका, वो मेरे अच्छे दोस्त हैं, क्या नाम है उनका यार, हरबंस मुखिया.
जी. इनफैक्ट वो हमारे डिपार्टमेंट में आते रहते हैं. एक लेक्चर उन्होंने भी अभी दिया था हाल में.
चलें, बहुत अच्छा
जी. और वो जेएनयू से ही है और मैंने भी अपनी पीएचडी जेएनयू से ही की है, तो उनसे पहले भी राब्ता था. जी. एक
मेरा लेक्चर जेएनयू में भी करवाए ना.
अच्छा. कब हुआ सर? अच्छा, कराएं. अच्छा,
मैं कह रहा हूँ करवाओ वहां पे. हाँ,
जरूर सर, जरूर. I will most certainly tell a few people that I know there to most certainly host you. I think they'll be happy to do that.
Is Professor Sucheta Mahajan still there?
Yes, sir.
Still there, very much so. She is.
Well, maybe you can talk to her, because she and I were on a panel only about 3-4 days ago.
कारवां थी?
नहीं जी, कारवां नहीं, ये था वो क्या नाम है उसका, इंडियंस, द आर्गुमेंटेटिव इंडियंस.
अच्छा. Okay. No, I'll certainly put in a word with Professor Mahajan. I think Mukul has joined us. Hi, Mukul.
Yes, Professor Mukul Kesavan, I'm seeing him, and I read his mother is from Lahore. यार, कमाल हो गया.
Mukul, you need to unmute yourself.
Professor Ahmed, welcome.
Thank you very much.
born in Gujranwala, but she taught in Lahore. She taught in Lahore in the early 1940s.
Amazing.
she-
It's these connections keep coming back in my life. It's unbelievable. Have you seen my book on the partition of Punjab?
I have, in fact, I've been refreshing my memory of it, the partition of the Punjab and its cleansing, and it's such a sort of traumatic tale that
It is. It is.
this is the one you wrote in 2012, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
That's right. One of the interesting things, Professor Ahmed, is that I don't know about about the second book written in 2013, but both the 2012 book and your most recent book are luckily available in India via Indian publishers.
Yeah. I tell you the story of this, the book In Between, Pakistan, the Garrison State.
Right.
It was published under another name, the Pakistan Army in Politics,
I see.
by an Indian publisher. I keep forgetting their name. Anyhow, it was attacked so viciously by this character, Ajay Shukla,
Really?
of the yes, NDTV. He said every sentence he reads, he doesn't know what to do. It's such a awful book. Nobody should ever touch
You
it, ever
are
read it. These
joking.
are his words. These are his words.
What
That's
an
utterly
extraordinary
surprising.
vituperative attack. What was
It
his
was-
objection? What was his objection to the book?
No, can you believe it? His main objection, if I understood him, was that in order to explain why the Pakistani state had become a garrison state, I had gone all the way to explain it in the context of the Cold War and international relations
Yes.
and US role. He
Of
thought
course.
that was something distracting. So you can imagine his narrow-minded way of thinking. Probably he's from the military and not trained to think in a wider sort of more
In fact,
complex way.
One of the most interesting things about that book is the way in which you embed the story of the garrison state in
Yeah.
the military entrenchment of the colonial state in the Punjab.
Quite
I
right.
found that really fascinating because it gives you a sense of historical continuity.
Absolutely. Let me say that the garrison state post-colonial, during the colonial period is actually a work of a historian, Tentai Jung. I then, took that idea and
Right.
related it to a political science concept of
Right.
Harold Oswell, and then have gone on to explain why Pakistan is a garrison state.
Well, I mean, it's so fascinating to actually have Punjab. For example, a friend of mine, Professor Indivar Kamtekar, who had written a PhD thesis at Cambridge on the relationship between the colonial state and the post-independence Indian state. How, in a sense, it was shaped by the Second War.
Okay.
In fact, his argument about the violence in the Punjab was a simple one. He said, the reason why Punjab sees such violence and the eastern border does not is that in Punjab you have nearly 1 million soldiers who have been trained to kill, who have weapons.
That's
on both
what I
sides.
also argue in my
Yeah.
book. I mean, I've given all the details. In fact, there is a scandal about it. The INA people on both sides actually took part in the killings. Can you believe it?
Really?
So this whole myth about a secular INA founded by Subhash Chandra Bose needs to be discussed. On our side, for example, his right-hand man, Habibur Rahman, and then Major Kiani, two, key figures. They fought in the Pakistan-Kashmir operation in 47-48.
Right.
And then there was a Sikh, Colonel Naranjan Singh Gill. He is notorious for the deaths of thousands of Punjabi Muslims in East Punjab. Both INA close characters. And then another INA person I found in Lahore, stealing from Hindus and Sikhs who were living for Delhi by train, taking all their possessions. Can you believe it?
It's so fascinating how these romantic myths about
All
history.
this is in my book. It's all on record now.
That's wonderful.
But one day I want to meet this fellow Ajay Shukla and find out what's his problem. Why did he do it?
I'll try and get in touch with him. I'll try and get in touch with him.
Please do, and tell him that his review was so shattering. I said, well, to hell with this. If the Indians don't want to appreciate my work, it's up to them. I thought this was...
Please don't identify all Indians with one dyspeptic reviewer.
Of course not.
I mean,
of course not.
We are very enthusiastic about
But for that book, just for that book, it was
no. I mean,
such an unfair. Yeah.
I don't know Ajay directly, but I know him via friends. So I'll certainly ask him about this because it seems very strange.
Please do.
I will.
And tell him that I would like to meet him eye to eye one day and find out what's his problem.
I will certainly do that. Roma, should we begin?
Yes, Mukul, I think we should.
It's 2:00, so we should just begin on time.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. It just gives me enormous pleasure to welcome Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, and I want to congratulate our History Society, Muarrikhin, for having the imagination and the initiative to invite a scholar who, in the last decade, through 3 books, has radically reshaped the history of partition, the creation of Pakistan, and the Punjab. Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed's principal scholarly affiliations are with Stockholm University, where he is the Professor Emeritus of Political Science, and he's also Honorary Senior Fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies in the National University of Singapore. The 3 books that I referred to in chronological order are his book on the partition of the Punjab, called The Punjab, Bloodied, Partitioned and Cleansed, which was published in 2012, which is a celebrated piece of writing on the way in which, as he puts it memorably in this book, that Punjab in 1947 is one of the earliest modern examples of systematic ethnic cleansing. This is not a word that was known in 1947, but certainly retrospectively, it seems to be exactly that phenomenon.
Yeah.
Soon after this, he wrote a book on the making of a militarized Pakistan, Pakistan, the garrison state, origins, evolution, and consequences, where he discusses how and why historically Pakistan, both through late colonialism and in its incipient decades, was shaped into a state largely run by institutionalized military rule. It's in many ways an extraordinarily original argument. His latest book, published just this year, is Jinnah, His Successes, Failures, and Role in History. I think we're hugely fortunate to have a scholar like this dealing with the subject that he is dealing with, which is, in today's lecture, which is the partition of India and Jinnah, the relationship that is between the partition and Jinnah, revisiting its consequences for the minorities. At a time when, in all of South Asia, we see a kind of resurgent majoritarianism in every nation state created after the partition of 47-48, whether it's Pakistan or India or Myanmar or Sri Lanka, it's really crucial for us to try and understand the political origins of the creation of this majoritarianism, and especially its consequences for the minorities of the subcontinent. We are really privileged to have Professor Ahmed to enlighten us on this today. And without more ado, I'd like to welcome him to Jamia and its department, and I would ask him to begin with his lecture.
Thank you very much, Professor Kesavan. I'm deeply touched by your words and by this invitation extended to me by Muarrikhin, historians. One is always awestruck by the amount of things they produce, and one is learning all the time. Without history, I don't think you can find anchor in this world going back or going forward. So history is one of the major sources for becoming wise about the world, and in the end you realize that you know so little. That's the tragedy we all live with ultimately. But whatever little I know about the partition and Jinnah's role, I'm delighted to share with you. There was understanding that I should speak in Hindustani, but should I continue in English, or what really would be the right language to speak in?
Professor Ahmed, it's entirely up to you. You know, whatever you feel
Okay,
would be
I'm
more
more
appropriate.
used to doing it in English because all
Wonderful.
the vocabulary and jargon is in English, so it's so much easier.
Fine, that's wonderful.
Let me say like this, that to the defense of Jinnah, he was a very late convert to the idea of the partition of India. His earlier career is one of a committed Indian nationalist. He gave up that role or that ambition when he realized that his leadership, he hoped to be the leader for all Indians, would not be sustainable once it has become a mass movement. And I think somewhere down the years, he held Gandhi responsible for displacing him from that leadership role. Then the second phase in his life is that of a Muslim communitarian. In all the books that I've seen on Jinnah, nobody has done this four-phase demarcation of Jinnah's political life. As a Muslim communitarian, he came up with the theory of that India was not one nation. In the earlier first stage, he believes in one Indian nation, and like the partition of Bengal, the founding of the Muslim League, all such acts he considers divisive. The 1906 deputation led by Sir Aga Khan he condemns. But then after this clash with Jinnah, with Gandhi over the non-cooperation movement and bringing the masses into politics, he then started championing the idea that India was not one nation, but it consisted of many nationalities. And the nationalities he named were Hindus, Muslims, the Dravidian people of the south, Sikhs, and Dalits. And he championed the cause of a very loose Indian union, with the center given only essential services like defense and foreign services and foreign affairs, and all the rest vested in the provinces. Against this was the Indian National Congress's Motilal Nehru report, which had recommended, and I think the Motilal Nehru report we all need to read again. It was, in my opinion, a very workable, very practical, very realistic model for India remaining a federation with cultural plurality, with many provinces, and yet with an effective center. Like 39 items were given to the center and 67 to the provinces. So it wasn't a bad deal at all. But Jinnah had gone into opposition to the Indian National Congress, and his ambition to be leader number one of wherever he was, I think, drove him in a direction away from mainstream politics. Muslim communitarian also ended without him getting any major clout in Indian politics. Of course, he was a very effective speaker. His work in the Legislative Assembly was very impressive. So I'm not demeaning his role as a natural born leader with many qualities, charisma and so on. But his ambition was that he should be at the center of the political, campaign which was going on in India. When does Jinnah then become central to the politics of India? I would say that it is after Nehru makes the 1936 speech in Lucknow, where he says that in a future free India, the Zimidari system will be abolished, and we will recast India in the image of a Soviet type economy and society. followed by then the 1937 elections, in which Muslim League was routed, the Congress won. The Muslim in the Muslim majority provinces of especially northwestern India, it was the regional parties led by Muslims which won most of the reserved seats for Muslims. And what the Congress then does is it serves an ultimatum that those Muslim Leaguers elected on a Muslim League ticket, if this is in the UP, if they want to be considered for a ministerial position, they must resign from the Muslim League and join the Congress. I know Indian historians are extremely sensitive about it, saying that there was no such agreement and so on. And maybe this was just a gentleman's sort of understanding and no proper agreement. But from the Muslim League point of view, this ultimatum was like, either you dissolve yourself and join us, or you perish. And Jinnah was not the sort who would give up. So in 1937, he tells the Bengal governor that henceforth I will use communalism as my main political tool to make the Muslims aware of their, separate destiny, their distinct interests from the rest of the Indian communities. And he came up then with the two-nation theory. Let me say that the two-nation theory, once again, has a very long pedigree. One can begin with Sir Syed on one side, and then you have some Bengali Hindus coming up with similar ideas. And then you have Bhai Parmanand in Multan, and Lala Lajpat Rai also speaking of a partition where Muslims are sort of thrust west of the Indus, and the rest is made only a nation of Hindus. Or the Muslims who stay behind should be reconverted to Hinduism. There were these ideas as well. On the other hand, you have Muslims like Sir Aga Khan talking about an Anglo-Mohammedan empire extending from India into Afghanistan, Iran, and even in Turkey. So these ideas existed on both sides, and I'm sure the British were having a great time looking at all these possibilities, who to use when. And then remember, you have all the princely states, and you have the Hindu Mahasabha. So all these factors, then the RSS comes in. You have Savarkar, 1923, speaking of Hindutva, an idea which has now come to haunt India with this majoritarianism. But 1923 and then 1937, he again clearly, writes an article saying that it's futile and it's attempt of some Indian leaders. He meant, I think, Gandhi and Nehru, and to believe that Hindus and Muslims can be one nation. This was a doomed sort of idea. 1938, you have Goalkar, the RSS supremo, saying that we should learn from the Germans and what they have done to the Jews, and we should apply the same principles to non-Hindus in India. They have no right to be equal citizens. At most, they can be second-rate citizens, and they must accept Hindu culture and identity and so on and so forth. Then if you move into the Muslim side, you have Allama Iqbal in 1930 at Allahabad giving the idea of a state for Muslims in northwestern India. I have shown, this is, when you review these positions, Iqbal's idea, later on he sort of withdrew from it, saying that he didn't at all mean it would be outside the British Empire, but some like the frontline state of the British Empire to meet any threats from the northwest. But this idea of a Pakistan was confined to about 20 to 25% of the Muslim population. The rest were to be in India. Similarly, then you have now or never by Chaudhry Rahmat Ali. I think that's the most communal, the most vicious dichotomization of Hindus and Muslims as two hostile worldviews, two hostile people. The heroes of one are the villains of the other. I mean, all these are arguments presented by Chaudhry Rahmat Ali. Up until then, Jinnah was skeptical about the two-nation theory. But after 36, 37, he then openly declares, he confides to the governor of Bombay that he's going to use communalism. And then if you see his speech on 22nd March 1940 in Lahore, that's, I call it the foundational speech of the two-nation theory, where actually all the ideas which Rahmat Ali had set forth are adopted by him, and he gives his authority to a peripheral idea. And then on the 23rd and 24th, of course, is the Lahore Resolution, where they demand separate Muslim states in northwestern, northeastern India, where Muslims are in a majority. Thereafter, Muhammad Ali Jinnah relentlessly, unflinchingly campaigns on the two-nation theory. Not even once I've shown, and I would like someone to challenge me, that at any stage Jinnah deviated from this dichotomization, demonization of Hindus by Muslims, and so on and so forth. So there is a theory, and it goes around in Western universities and was very popular in Lahore, in Pakistan, until my Jinnah book has come out and now everybody is quiet, is that Jinnah was just using the partition demand to extract better conditions for Muslims within a united India. I have shown that this is not the case. Not at all. Repeatedly, he says that there is a conspiracy hatched by the Congress that we are using the demand for Pakistan only as a bargaining ploy. He says we want Pakistan, and then, arguments like that in a united India, Islam will be annihilated, Jinnah's words. The Muslims will be obliterated, once again, his words. And that Congress represented Hindu Raj. He said that there was no difference between the Hindu Mahasabha and the Congress. And the only way to save Islam and Muslims was to have their separate state. Now, the thing is, up until now, Muslim separatism and these ideas were all rooted in North India, where the Muslim minority, the aristocracy of the Mughal period was in a decadent sort of decline, and so on and so forth. And they had been using this idea of Muslim separatism. But once this is brought to the northwestern zones and northeastern zones of India, then you have Muslims of the majority provinces now being attracted to the idea of Pakistan. And there, certain things happen which helped Jinnah immensely. The Second World War breaks out, and the Congress commits one of its many blunders. It refuses to support the war effort, saying that first you transfer power to us, and then as a free nation, the argument was fine. How can we, a colony, fight for the freedom of the colonizer? We have to be free in order to make our own decisions. It was a sound argument, but politically, I think this was removed from the reality, because somehow, very recently, I was in a panel with Professor Sucheta Mahajan, and she emphasized the same point, that the Muslim separatist movement which Jinnah was now peddling, was not taken seriously by the Congress. But after the Second World War, with the Congress opposing British war effort and the British, determined to hold on to India, from where they had 2.5 million of their soldiers recruited, largely from the Muslim majority areas, they would not let go of India. At that point, then Jinnah goes and talks to Lithgow and tells him, look, if you want to keep Congress at bay, you must recognize the importance of the Muslim community of India, and especially their spokesperson, which is the All India Muslim League. And Lithgow is attracted to that idea, and that's where Jinnah himself is on record saying that up until now it was Gandhi, Gandhi, Gandhi. Now they are laying a red carpet for me. This is Jinnah saying himself. So Jinnah becomes important for Lithgow, and Lithgow, I've quoted, saying that had Jinnah not joined hands with us, maybe holding on to India would have become very difficult. But the Congress doesn't stop making blunders. There is the Quit India movement started. And then for 3 years, the Congress is sitting in jail, and it's a field day for Jinnah and the Muslim League. For 3 years, they make the breakthrough in the Punjab, in Sindh, and partially in the Northwest Frontier province as well. In doing that, Jinnah plays the Islamic card, the communal card. The 1945-46 election is rabidly communal. I've given the details of it in my Punjab book, but also in a shorter form in the Jinnah book. So you can check all that. The problem now was that if India were to be partitioned on the basis of religion, what will happen to the minorities? On the 23rd and 24th of March, when the Lahore resolution was presented, speaker after speaker, most of them from the UP and even from Madras, would come up and say that the Hindus must remember that if they mistreat the Muslim minorities, then we can deal with Hindus and Sikhs who would be in Pakistan. So the hostage theory is presented. On the 30th of March in 1941, Jinnah is confronted in Kanpur by the Muslims, saying that the Lahore resolution wants Pakistan in areas where already the elected governments are with Muslims. So Pakistan exists already. What will happen to us? And I quote Jinnah saying that I'll make 2 crore Muslims. Actually, it should have been 3 crore, the right number. Taste martyrdom and get smashed. In order to liberate 7 crore, it should be 6 crore. So you can well imagine Jinnah was not making any compromise. At one stage, he even discusses about what does he want to share. He says, look, the Congress wants to have 16 annas in their pocket. A rupee used to have 16 annas. I want only 3 annas out of that. But it is the Congress who doesn't want to give me anything. So when he was looking for some solution, it was still the partition. Give me the 3 annas and you keep the rest for the Hindus and the rest. So now, after all this, then you have the 1945-46 election, where demonization of non-Muslims, Hindus and Sikhs, and then the Sikhs attack, of course, saying that we will not let Punjab be taken over by the Muslim League. We will resist it, so that those portions of the Punjab which are Hindu Sikh majority are either given to a Sikh state or to India. Actually, they said it only a week after the Lahore resolution in 1940 was presented. But then this was repeated all the time by the Sikh leaders. It is at this point that then you have the British making the decision. Up until now, they were trying to secure some sort of acceptance for the cabinet mission plan. We don't have time to go into who did what at the cabinet mission plan. All we know is that it failed to win over the principal parties to the future of India, and so it was a failure. Then comes Mountbatten, and Mountbatten talks to the people. And although on the 20th of February 1947, Prime Minister Attlee had said that they will transfer power by June 1948, in the 3 June 1947 plan, the partition is brought forward to mid-August 1947, less than 11 weeks to divide a subcontinent of about 390 million people. And this had to be done in a great hurry. The Punjab and Bengal assemblies are split into two, Hindu and Sikh districts on one hand and Muslim districts on the other. If either voted for partition, the provinces would be partitioned. And that's what they did. The Hindus, Sikhs voted for the partition of Bengal and Punjab, and they were partitioned. But while all this was happening, let me bring my research from the Punjab partition. Already from March 1947, the Punjab was going through, an escalation of communal violence. By May and June, it had spiraled to a level where the British governor was finding himself totally helpless. Then you have the Punjab Boundary Commission and the Bengal Boundary Commission, and they finally come up with a Radcliffe Award. But this is announced on the 17th or made public on the 17th. This leaves millions of people, unwanted minorities, on the wrong side. And in the Punjab, as I've shown, there was ethnic cleansing. 14 to 15 million people had to run for their lives. And when you run for your life, you carry with you bitter memories and trauma and so on. So the experience of the partition came to haunt the politics of India and Pakistan in a way that we live with that reality even today. What happened then in India to the minorities and what happened to the minorities in Pakistan? You see, I have also looked at the 1947 partition plan and how this partition was going to take place. Had all Hindus and Sikhs stayed in West Pakistan, Sindh, Punjab, Northwest Frontier and Balochistan, they would constitute 21% of the population. But by December 1947, all of them had left or had been made to flee. There is ample, abundant evidence showing that planned attacks were carried out against the Hindus and Sikhs, who were the more prosperous communities of the Punjab. They were into business, they were into education, they had greater representation in the government offices. The Muslims had lagged behind. So this was a great opportunity to sort of attack and drive these people out and acquire their properties and so on. I mean, I've written it and it's acknowledged everywhere that this is absolutely the case. The revenge was taken by the Sikhs from the Muslims of East Punjab. But in the rest of India, where 9.8% of Muslims had stayed behind, the Congress government of Nehru was able to prevent this massive attacks on Muslims. Some took place, but this was brought under control. Of course, Mahatma Gandhi had been assassinated by that time. So that had put the Hindu Mahasabha in a bad light and so on. But I must pay credit to Nehru and the Congress governments who enabled the Muslims to make a free choice. If they wanted to remain in India, they could. If they wanted to come to Pakistan, that was also possible. That population has grown now to 14.2%, some say 15%. But in West Pakistan, already by December 1947, the 21% was reduced to 1.6%, and till today they are 1.6%, confined largely to Sindh province. That's all. Then I would say that there's a lot of controversies surrounding about Congress making the Muslims a vote bank and so on. I think you know that better than me, and maybe I should speak more about Pakistan. What we know is that after the Shah Bano case, we find the Hindu right, constantly gaining support on grounds that there is a Muslim appeasement, while Hindu laws, family laws have been changed. The Muslims have been able to retain their family laws, although I show that in 1931, a resolution was passed by the Congress because they needed the support of the Jamia Ulama Hind, that, okay, there will be fundamental rights based on the rights of citizens, but still, personal matters would be covered by Sharia. So Congress had to make those compromises, and I think it was not out of a concern to make Muslims a vote bank, but rather a sympathy for the Muslims who had stayed on in India, not to attack them directly. Although they say that this was part of Hindu appeasement. Since then, we have had this CAA, and I've seen how in Delhi and the rest of India, the Modi government's discriminatory laws have been resisted by the people. Obviously, the Muslims are an object of being demonized, of being alienated. What about this idea of 14th August being a day to remember the horrors of the partition? It's the Independence Day of Pakistan. So when your own Prime Minister is doing this, it's a clear signal that the Muslims are now to be a target of different sorts of allegations and even physical attacks. Now let's come to Pakistan. Jinnah had argued that Hindus and Muslims were two diametrically opposite nations. Fine. Now you get Pakistan. How do the Pakistani Muslims behave with one another? Immediately after Pakistan came into being, 3 days before that, there is Jinnah's famous speech to the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan. All in this great state of Pakistan, Hindus will cease to be Hindus and Muslims will cease to be Muslims, not in a religious sense, because that is a matter of private faith, but as citizens of the state. That speech, I have argued, was meant to convince the Indian government not to, throw out the 35 million Muslims. Had the Indian government behaved the way we treated our minorities in West Pakistan, 35 million would be thrown out, and at least 30 million would come to West Pakistan and maybe 5 million to East Pakistan. And at that time, West Pakistan's population was only 33 million. So double the number, with no resources, no industrial base, only an agrarian economy to sustain these people. Pakistan would have crashed. It would have spelled disaster right from the beginning. But that didn't happen. So I want to remember the Congress government with gratitude that, and I have shown Jinnah's helplessness, because then he says in many of his speeches that I urged the Indian government to act in a civilized manner and do its duty. It's the same Hindus and the same Congress party, he said, who were Muslim haters and who represented Hindu Raj, Hindu imperialism. But now he was appealing to them to enable the Muslims to stay on in India, and the Indian government did do its duty. What did we do with the Hindus and Sikhs? I've told you. What about the Muslims? You see, among Muslims, the sectarian divisions are as deeply rooted as maybe the caste system among Hindus, you know. At the death of the Prophet, the problem of succession took place, and to this day, that problem has not been resolved. When you have the Shia and Sunni having opposite heroes, you know, there are different ways of understanding the Quran and the Hadith. And we know that in the 1990s, there was Shia Sunni sectarian killings. People would go into each other mosques, into the graveyards, and with light guns and, you know, brain guns kill one another. So how have the Muslims fared better as a nation if their religion, shared religion, gave them a sense of unity? Not at all. Actually, Pakistan has, after the Hindus and Sikhs had left, the whole idea of the two-nation theory turned inwardly. And now it was who is a true Muslim. And it has led to further elimination. The Ahmadis were turned out because they held beliefs anathema to Sunnis, who are a majority, and to the Shias. Then the Shia-Sunni conflict has taken place. Then even the Deobandi and Barelvis, sects of Sunni Islam, have had terrorism done to one another. An interesting factor that under democracy, a majority of Pakistanis were denied their rights. So it's not even only minorities who have been put to great disadvantage, but even a majority like the Bengalis. In 1970 elections, they won landslide, but were denied their right to form a government, and Pakistan broke up. Then, of course, there are all those stories of mobs going and attacking Christian churches and killing Christians on grounds of blasphemy, forcible conversion of Hindu girls and them being married off to Muslims. All these are true. And of course, the Ahmadis have been at the receiving end for a long time now. We have killed one of the governors who just showed some sympathy for a Christian woman accused of blasphemy. And he was gunned down by his own bodyguard. And I mean, this is how the whole idea that religion is the basis of being part of the community politically, I mean, as a religious community is fine, then has implications for who will have what rights, what laws will be there, what sort of constitution will be there. The Pakistani constitutions have progressively, one after the other, the three constitutions increased the role of Islam, not decreased it. And now we have an education policy in which students will have to memorize the Quran. You know, as you go up, you have to learn all the 30 chapters of the Quran and the Hadith literature. And that is going to bring in Talibanization through education, some of us suspect. I think I'll stop here and invite your comments and questions.
Moin, please take over.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Ishtiaq. That was absolutely lovely and very, very important lecture that you delivered. It's a very touchy topic, of course, but it is very important if in the capacity of a scholar of history to have a complete view over how the partition happened and what were the consequences specifically when we are speaking about the minorities. Professor Ishtiaq, we have some of the questions, and all the other participants who want to ask the questions, please put in your questions in the comment box, and those who want to directly interact, I'm sorry, because considering the mic glitch and many people switching on their mic at the same time, we cannot allow that. So in case you have a question, please put it in the comment box and I'll ask that on your behalf to Professor Ishtiaq. So Professor Ishtiaq, we have a question from Kaifi Karimi. The person asks, did Gandhiji offer Jinnah for the Prime Minister post to avoid partition?
Yes, I think he not only, he didn't directly offer Jinnah, he went to Mountbatten and said that, can you convey this message to Jinnah? Apparently, Mountbatten talked to Nehru and Patel and then decided not to inform Jinnah. I understand that Jinnah would have overruled it, saying this was another trick of Gandhi to prevent the creation of Pakistan. Because on in early January 1940, the Dalit leader Dr. Ambedkar, the Dravidian leader Mr. Periyar, they met at Jinnah's place, and the press, this was the story that they are going to form a party of the three communities, Muslims, Dalits, and Dravidians. But nothing of the sort happened. After 2-3 days of discussion, Ambedkar then turned against Islam even. He wrote very nasty things about Islam, that it's not a brotherhood of all, it's the brotherhood of only the believers and so on. Periyar also was very disappointed because Jinnah didn't seem to be interested in forming a party where three communities would be represented. I think Jinnah's psychological problem was he didn't want to risk again a leadership contest. He had lost it to Gandhi. He had fought for it against Sir Shafi, Sir Fazle Hussain, and some Bengali leaders and become the Muslim leader. Now to share it with two other leaders of different communities, I think is a risk he didn't want to take. Anyhow, on the 16th of January, Mahatma Gandhi writes a letter, which I have quoted in my book, saying, "My dear Qaid-e-Azam, I address you as Qaid-e-Azam because everybody calls you Qaid-e-Azam. You are the only leader of a stature who can form a national party to challenge the Congress. You say that the Congress is a upper caste Hindu party. Well, good. Muslims, Dalits, and Dravidians together would be equal number. So then you can compete with the Congress for power in India." And Jinnah doesn't pay any heed to this. He just keeps quiet, saying that India is a country of nationalities. Later on, he comes, 2 months later, he comes to the idea of the two-nation theory, that there are only two nations, Hindus and Muslims. The rest are ethnic groups, nationalities, but it's Hindus and Muslims who are entitled to separate states, not others. So and then during the discussions with the cabinet mission plan, at least thrice Gandhi tells the cabinet mission plan that he would ensure that if Jinnah forms the government and even chooses its ministers, that he will ensure that the Congress supports this idea. Once again, I think this was not presented to Jinnah. I think Jinnah would have rejected all that as the he had a strange feeling that Gandhi was too clever by half, that he was trying to deny Jinnah now his chance to be the great leader of a state. And so he would not have fallen prey to that sort of temptation. I am 100% sure about that. But it's a very popular conspiracy theory about what happened during the partition.
Thank you so much, Professor Ishtiaq, for that answer. We have another participant, Muhammad Ifamuddin. He asks, during the partition, was the migration from Pakistan to India bigger or the migration from India to Pakistan? Which of the two?
Well, of the 6 million Muslims in East Punjab, except for about 80,000 left in Malerkotla, all others had to run for their lives. Okay? And about, I think, 500,000 were killed. On our side, in West Punjab, the total Hindu Sikh population was 4.5 million, and I've shown that at least 500,000 had already started moving across the border, because from March 1947, attacks were taking place against the Hindus and Sikhs in the Muslim majority northwestern districts like Rawalpindi and so on. So 4 million then moved to India. Then from Sindh and northwest frontier and a small population, Balochistan, the total population was 6.5 million, of which only 1.6% was left on our side. If we say 6 million Muslims came from East Punjab, then maybe another million, I don't know how many, maybe 500,000 from the rest of India. So it's equal number of people moving in both directions. But it would have been far greater had all the Muslims dispersed throughout India been forced to leave. Just remember that. It's only in East Punjab that there was an expulsion of Muslims to the last man, except in this tiny state of Malerkotla. That's why that happened. We can discuss if somebody is interested. And I think at least 250,000 to 300,000 Hindus and Sikhs were killed when they left from our part of West Pakistan. In East Pakistan, the attacks didn't take place because of Gandhiji was present, and then in Noakhali, Sohrawardi had, decided not to continue with his communalism and become sort of a supporter of Gandhiji. So nothing happened in 1947. But in 1950, there was attack on the Hindu minorities and 10,000 at least were pushed out. In 1947, there were 23%. Then when the civil war started, the Hindu population had gone down to 17%. After the civil war, the Bangladesh population of Hindus reduced to 12%. And now they say it is down to 10 or 9%. So there has been a constant decline of Hindus even in Bangladesh, but more so during the civil war.
Thank you so much, Professor. We have another question. This one is coming from Hamad Chaudhary. It's a pretty general question. The question is, what was the relevant cause of the partition? It could be a very detailed answer, but please suit yourself.
What was what?
What was the relevant cause of the partition? It's by Muhammad Hamad Chaudhary.
Relevant? यार मैंने तो सारा बताया ही आपको. ये है कि ये वजह थी. इनमें से और सा कौन सा है जो irrelevant है? पहले ये मुझे बताओ. No, this is not a question I can. This would only mean that I am talking to you about irrelevant things. No, I would like to protest.
Excuse me, sir.
we would certainly.
Excuse me, sir. Hello.
हाँ जी.
So can I clear it?
हाँ जी, हमाद चौधरी साहब बोलो यार, बोलो.
Yes, sir. Can I clear it, sir?
Yeah, speak up.
Thank you, sir. Sir, if we talk about the for the post of prime minister, sir, someone talking about the some communalism also happened on that time, sir. So, sir, my question is that, sir, as like means if we talk about the post partition India, sir. तो सर तब एक बात मैं ये कहना चाह रहा हूँ सर कि as like means अगर हम पार्टीशन से पहले की बात करते हैं तो मैं बहुत सारी ऐसी चीजें देखने मिलती है जो 1935 के इलेक्शन हुआ सर उसमें ऐसी जगह पर हुआ कि पाकिस्तान मतलब जो मुस्लिम लीग थी, मुस्लिम लीग को इतने वोट्स नहीं मिले जिसके अकॉर्डिंग वो सर गवर्नमेंट बना सके कुछ स्टेट में सर, मगर कांग्रेस को बहुत ज्यादा वोट मिले सर. अगर ऐसे टाइम पे सर एक्सक्यूज सर प्लीज मैं थोड़ा 5 मिनट्स सर ऐसे वक्त में यस सर ऐसे वक्त में अगर सर वहां पे अगर रिप्रेजेंटेशन की बात हो रही है मुस्लिम लीग की तरफ से सर, तो सर वहां पर कांग्रेस ने उसको डिनाई करा कि आई विल नॉट गिव यू एनी रिप्रेजेंटेशन ऑन द बिहाफ ऑफ सेपरेट इलेक्टोरेट सर. सो दैट वाज क्लियर सर. मेरा ये कहना है सर कि अगर 1946 में अंतरिम गवर्नमेंट बनती है कांग्रेस गवर्नमेंट की सर, इंडिया की अंतरिम गवर्नमेंट बनती है एज अ कांग्रेस पार्टी के रूप में सर, तो उस वक्त अगर मुस्लिम लीग का सर एक डेलीगेट आता है और ये कहता है सिर्फ आप हमें अपनी गवर्नमेंट में शामिल कर दे, मैं पार्टीशन को डिनाई करता हूँ. Sir, delegate was also came in India with the leadership of Muhammad Liaquat Ali sir. तो सर उस वक्त कांग्रेस के जो मेन इंपॉर्टेंट लीडर्स थे वो ये कहते हैं कि आपको हम अपनी गवर्नमेंट में शामिल नहीं करेंगे क्योंकि आपके ऊपर एक कम्युनल का टैग लगा हुआ है. तो सर अगर कम्युनलिज्म की बात करें ऐसे वक्त में कांग्रेस ने
बात सुनो ये ऐसे बिल्कुल नहीं है. मैंने अपनी वो पूरी जो जिन्ना की किताब में देख लें
Hamad, please
Interim
listen to the
government
answer.
बेवल ने बनाई थी, interim government बेवल ने बनाई थी और कहा था नेहरू को कि you must bring the Muslim League in, and Nehru wrote to Jinnah Sahab that I would like to invite you to join the interim government. Now Jinnah insisted that he wanted 50-50% representation, and he would not let Congress nominate a Muslim to the interim government. Only the Muslim League could do it. They even agreed to that. And an interim government was formed. But that interim government, cabinet form of government requires all ministers to work together. They worked at cross purposes. And I think the Muslim League, at all, on all occasions, opposed whatever the Congress was wanting to introduce through the interim government. So this was no interim government at all. I think this allegation is once again unfounded. The Muslim League did join the interim government, but then they didn't work like a cabinet government must. One for all and all for one. This is the principle. The ministers are on record doing things against one another. And the budget which was produced, I think in February 1947, it taxed only industry and business and not a word about land reforms or about, and this was obviously a budget hitting at the Congress support base. The Muslim League support base were the landlords. So it was such a unfair or uneven budget that at that point it is Sardar Patel. Nehru was willing to accept that budget. It's Sardar Patel who protests that no more, we can't work with them. So that's when the Congress agreed कि ठीक है partition हो जाए. So this is not true. This is not correct कि उन्होंने interim government में इनको welcome नहीं किया, बुलाया भी, ministries भी मिली और जो जिन्ना साहब चाहते थे वो ही हुआ. मुसलमान कोई कांग्रेस नहीं थी नॉमिनेट कर सकती, सिर्फ इनको हक मिला जिन्ना साहब को. लेकिन अगर आप मिलके काम ही ना करें तो फिर हुकूमत कैसे चलेगी?
Thank you so much, Professor. We have another question. This one is probably the last one. It's by Ashwati. Ashwati has been working on Indo-Bangladesh border politics, and she asks that for me, two-nation theory didn't fit well in East Bengal, as partition took place not on Hindu-Muslim communal lines, but that partition's soul is so alive till date when it comes to border exchange, spatial mobility, etc. Wish to know your opinion. Do you think that it happened on the communal lines, the partition of Bengal, of the specifically East Bengal?
Did it or did it not? Of course, if you look at the Bengal Boundary Commission's, deliberations on this, the whole idea was that the Muslim majority contiguous areas be given to Pakistan and the Hindu majority contiguous districts be given to India. So it was a communal division of Bengal as well, the same as in Punjab. Absolutely communal. Some areas are an object of concern, like apparently Khulna was a Hindu majority district but given to Pakistan. And some other places like Chittagong hill tracts, the Chakma tribes didn't want to be in Pakistan, but they were given to Pakistan because of the Chittagong port that Pakistan needed. So some slight deviations were done from the communal majorities issues in Bengal as well as in Punjab. It was based on communal criteria.
Thank you so much, Professor. Ashish Kocher is asking, Jinnah in his 11 August speech stated that state would have no relation with the religion. What was the essence of his August 11 address?
I have explained My understanding is that because attacks on in East Punjab were taking place now in a massive way on Muslims, Jinnah was politically a very sharp person, I think. He realized that if this were to be repeated all over India, he would have 35 million Muslims rushing towards Pakistan, and Pakistan would collapse. So he wanted to assure the Indian government that we will take care of our minorities and you take care of your minorities. I think the Congress never had a plan to expel all Muslims. Ideologically, it was not meant to be a party of just Hindus. And that is why you find the Congress, especially Nehru, being uh, uh, attacked by the Hindu right all the time. Not so much Gandhiji as much as Nehru, because he consolidated the secular state. Okay? And so that's it.
Thank you so much once again. The next question is from Ashish Kocher. Ashish asks, if the Bengalis didn't give up their linguistic identity, why did the Punjabis choose Urdu over Punjabi and become the core of Pakistani politics?
Well, if you can become the core of Pakistani politics by choosing a language, what's wrong with that? Tell me. No, I'll tell you like this. You see, the British adopted Urdu as the language for recruitment to the British Indian Army. They had the experience of UP, but now when they came to Punjab, which became the base of their military, recruitment, they knew that it couldn't be Hindi. Urdu still stood a chance because Punjabi spoken in the cities and Urdu were very close to one another. There is a whole literature written by British administrators justifying why they didn't introduce Punjabi but continued with Urdu. They brought it because, you see, an imperial army or a state needs streamlined sort of processes to integrate their armed forces and their workforce, So if you have different languages, that makes communication difficult. So Urdu was brought from UP, transplanted into Punjabi, and look at Munshi Premchand. He was from UP. He wrote in Urdu. Krishan Chandra in Urdu. Rajinder Singh Bedi in Urdu. Saadat Hasan Manto, Faiz Saab, Sahir Ludhianvi. Urdu became the language of the literary medium of educated Punjabi literati, you can say. Although Manto once said, when Punjabis speak Urdu, it sounds as if they are lying. Okay, we don't have those fine sounds, which are in an Urdu spoken in Delhi or Lucknow, once upon a time at least. But this was the language in which you earned your, money or whatever. So you use it. And then in Pakistan, if now the Punjabis were to go back to Punjabi, they will have a problem convincing the Sindhis and Pakhtuns and the rest, all of them through the Aligarh Muslim University, the intelligentsia, Pakhtun, Punjabi, Urdu speaking, Madhya Pradesh, wherever, they had been educated in Urdu and English together. So Urdu then becomes the link language of Pakistan. And it suits the Punjabis to use Urdu because imposing Punjabi on the non-Punjabis could then create a reaction. So I think this is cleverly done. It's at the expense of Punjabi, true. But it's a useful way of maintaining your hold over the Pakistani state.
But language certainly they do flow like rivers. They do have their way of making tributaries. Well, before we take the next question, I'd request all the participants to please precise your questions because we really value Professor Ishtiaq's time. So don't write a very long, detailed question. Just stick to the question, whatever it is. Moving on to the next question, Professor. It's by Muzaffar Dar. He asks, What is your opinion regarding Maulana Azad's role in partition? How did he challenge Jinnah during the time?
I think Maulana Azad was, let me explain like this. Jawaharlal Nehru, Patel, and I think that wing of the Congress party wanted to have an India which was as large as possible, but which could be integrated into a cohesive, coherent nation state. And for that, you needed a strong center. Maulana Azad wanted the unity of India at all costs, like giving, compromising on an effective government, giving all the residuary rights to the provinces, and so on. So Azad's idea of an absolute basis for unity and the Congress's leaders' interest in a united India, but an India that you can rule in a coherent manner. If you have all the provinces with complete freedom to do things as they want, that state can't last a single week, a single day, I think. You need to have the same rules percolating through the whole state. I'll explain like this. When Pakistan came into being, Jinnah Sahab created 100 times more centralized Pakistan. Why? Because Pakistan had to be a state with effective authority, and you needed a strong center. So a modern state, and that of the magnitude of India, without a strong center would be very unstable. And then you had all the princely states, they were allowed to remain independent. That would lead to the balkanization, Princetown of India, and so on. They didn't want it. Congress didn't want it. Jinnah Sahab, when he took over Pakistan, he centralized Pakistan 10 times more than what the Indians have ever done. I hope I have answered this question.
Absolutely, Professor. There's another question from a person named AQ. The person says, will you please enlighten us why 2 lakh Muslims in Jammu were killed, as Jammu Kashmir was not a part of the partition? I guess that has more or less to do with the Dogra rule, but please feel free to add anything you want to, Prof.
Yes, only yesterday I was seeing on Indian channels, there is a gentleman, Professor Ram Puliani or something, a Punjabi who has lived all his life, I think, in Nagpur and so on. Very amiable gentleman. He was telling us how Maharaja Hari Singh, in order to ensure that at least Jammu became a Hindu majority part of his state, saw to it that the Muslims were thrown out, forced to leave, and in that process, some say 20,000, some say 200,000 Muslims were killed. Now, this story is not talked about a lot because this is an embarrassment. But can we blame it on Nehru and Patel? No, this was done by the Kashmiri leader wanting to retain a hold over Kashmir, hopefully as an independent state, because Pakistan had sent, there was an uprising in Punch, I think, in August, and this thing takes place either in September or October or November. So this is in reaction to what happened in Punch, but it was on a far grander scale. And of course, the Maharaja of Kashmir did this to ensure that if the valley cannot be made into Hindu majority, it was about 63% Muslim majority even in Jammu, that they were forced to leave. And it's now, I think, about 29% that it's a Muslim percentage of Jammu. True, this is one of those state-sponsored direct attack on minorities. Not minorities, a majority in Jammu by the ruler. These things have happened. The Maharaja of Patiala is guilty of the killing of Muslims in very large numbers during the partition as well. And in our part of West Pakistan, I've shown the Muslim League, local leaders and the rest, they were all involved. You see, communal attacks cannot last for more than 1 or 2 days on their own. If they last for a longer period, 110% the state is involved. So I've said that Hobbes has a theory about the state of nature suddenly degenerating a civil state, created by law, into a state of nature, a war of all against all. I said there is a third stage. The civil state ruled by the British ended on the 14th, 15th of August. Then for 3 days, there was a Hobbesian state of nature. Nobody knew what area belonged where. Then on the 17th, when the Radcliffe Award is made public and millions of people are on the wrong side, I say that a third type of state came into being, the partisan state. From our part, the state ensured that all the minorities we didn't want were thrown out. And in East Punjab, they ensured that all Muslims were thrown out. This was not repeated in the rest of India.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that answer. Waqar Talha Khan asks, is there any work done on the middle class or the economically weaker Muslims of central United Provinces and of South India and poor Hindus in Pakistan who couldn't, how partition did affect them in the 50s? Is there any specific work that deals with it?
I'm not informed about them, really. So I wouldn't have anything to share.
Moin, unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm so sorry. All right. So the next question is from Gaurav Sharma. Gaurav asks, by Act of 1935, only 14% of population has given voting right. So can we say only based on voting pattern of rich zamindar Muslim, because Muslim masses are always with Congress, so can we say Pakistan was created on demand of rich Muslim zamindar? What is your opinion on this?
Well, as I said, the 1936 presidential address of Nehru said they will abolish zemindari. And this Jinnah then took to the northwest western provinces where there were big Muslim landlords. The Muslims were either peasants, landlords, or artisans. The middle class, the business community, the small industrial commercial bourgeoisie, all were Hindu or Sikh, Khatris and Arodas. This was the composition. So, of course, the two-nation theory and the creation of Pakistan primarily served the interests of the landlord class of West Pakistan and the tribal chiefs. Whereas in East Pakistan, the landlords were mostly Hindus and the peasantry was Muslim. So there was a different basis for what happened in Bengal. Peasantry largely was Muslim, but landlords in Bengal, after Cornwallis's permanent settlement from Muslim Nawabs and so on, land ownership had gone into the hands of upper caste Hindus, Bhadralok. So that's a different story.
Thank you, sir. The next question we have from Shafat Wani. It's a pretty long question, but I hope you can stay with me for this. So the question is, don't you think this systematic economic marginalization of Muslims in post-colonial India, despite Congress ruling India for over 70 years, the Justice Rajendra Sachar Committee report, the abrogation of Article 370 in Kashmir, and Congress regular tempering of it before the abrogation, of course, the Lakshadweep constitutional mechanizations bringing the CAA NRC to oust out Muslims from Muslim majority states like Assam and Bengal deflates the argument the Muslims could have bargained better in electoral politics in United India. What do you think of it?
Well, let me turn the argument the other way around. Had there been all the Muslims of India in India, and there were about 38 to 42% in the British Indian Army, about 50% of the police was Muslim all over India, a state in which the two coercive apparatuses, the military and the police, are overrepresented with Muslims, and the Muslims are in a majority in the northwestern and northeastern parts, and then 1/3 dispersed in India, no Hindu Rashtra would have been possible. It's the other way around. The partition left India 86% to the Hindus, who are now maybe they say that the figures are declining. I don't know. And 96% people in Pakistan, they say, are Muslims, but they fight with one another. That's a different matter. But had all Muslims stayed on in India, the composition, the demography would have been such that no one religion could, or religious group could have dominated this state in an arbitrary manner. Power sharing would have taken place all along. In India, several Muslims have been your presidents, and you have generals in the Indian army as well. India's record compared to Pakistan is infinitely better. What has happened now is that your leaders are copying our model of Pakistan and trying to recast India in the light of the two-nation theory. That's what the tragedy is all about. And I think you all know that much better than me. That's the tragedy.
Absolutely. Completely agree with that.
अभी आप बात सुनो, कांग्रेस क्या करती 1947 जब उन्होंने महल 1955 ने नेहरू ने वो हिंदू पर्सनल लॉ को जो चेंज किया था, अगर मुसलमानों को भी कर देती तो ठीक था, नहीं किया क्योंकि वादा किया हुआ था कि we will not touch it until the Muslims are ready for it. This is the 1931 resolution adopted. I think he was a gentleman. Had Patel been in power, he would have gone ahead and done it. Maybe that was a better thing for India. I'm not judging anyone. I'm saying Nehru was not the type who would ride roughshod over the will of the people or some commitment he had given. He is even accused of Kashmir, half of Kashmir remaining in Pakistan. We have had a discussion on it lately. You can see it on the video. I've shown that even that is total nonsense. It is Sardar Patel who sent a message. First, Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan and Chaudhry Muhammad Ali, they came to Delhi, I think in November 1947, because they were on the partition. There were many committees, division of this, division of that, and so on. And while they were talking, Sardar Patel says, "Yeah, why do you keep on mentioning Junagadh? Why can't we do business on Kashmir and Punjab, Kashmir and Hyderabad?" Then I've quoted K.H. Khurshid. K.H. Khurshid was private secretary of Jinnah from 44 to October 1947. Yes, and he was also the president of the Pakistani Azad Kashmir. So such an important person. In his book, My Memoirs of Jinnah, he writes that he talked to Chaudhry Muhammad Ali, who became Pakistan's prime minister for about a year. He was a confidant of Jinnah. He was head of the civil service, and every evening Jinnah would let him come and inform him about what has happened during the day. So he was so close to Jinnah. K.H. Khurshid talked to Chaudhry Muhammad Ali. What is this story about Patel? And he said the thing is that once again Patel or India sent us a message in December 1947, and then he says specifically 22nd December that if you can keep Kashmir if you don't poke your nose in Hyderabad. And he says, I went to Jinnah. Mr. Jinnah did not seem to be interested. Jinnah, the great tactician, it seems, was aiming for some higher stakes. I'm sure some of the British people were telling him, Kashmir, you are going to get it so overwhelmingly Muslim. Why not try even Hyderabad and so on? There were, British conservatives who wanted to have some role to play in the subcontinental politics, and having princely states and so on, independent, was the best way to do it. So if anybody is to be blamed, and I'm not blaming Patel, I'm saying he probably thought that let Muslim India remain with Pakistan and Hindu India with India. And that would have meant that, okay, keep Kashmir, don't poke your nose in Hyderabad. Now I'm sure in India this is not very popular, what I tell you. But the thing is, Chaudhry Muhammad Ali was a confidant. He used to hero worship Jinnah. Why would he say something which was not correct? Because this demeans it shows one of the major blunders Jinnah made by not accepting this invitation. So this cannot be a lie. This is 100% true. I grew up in Lahore hearing the story, and then I've read about it, and also the people who have narrated this incident, and that's very reliable.
Thank you so much, Professor Ishtiaq. We have just Shafatwani, please. I'd request you to please switch off your mic. We won't be taking any more questions, but I have one last question. There's this saying that is associated with Jinnah in my part of the state. They say that it was said by Jinnah, the Muslims of India, before the partition, of course, the Muslims of India who are rooting for India, who are rooting for undivided India, they will have to spend their entire life proving their allegiance to India. Do you think that this scene somewhere fits into the contemporary scenario of India? Do the Muslims of the present day India have to prove their allegiance to India?
Let me turn this also round. If Jinnah wanted to protect the Muslims and to, save Islam and so on, why did he not invite all the Muslims? The best solution would then have been all Muslims move to Pakistan and Hindus remain in India. To force them to stay in India and then blame them, I think is not fair. As I've said, on the 30th of March at Kanpur, he said, I will make 2 crore Muslims taste martyrdom and get smashed in order to liberate 7 crore Muslims. That is called utilitarianism, philosophically speaking. But I think this is a very strange utilitarian argument. So it's the other way around. Any partition of India would leave about one third Muslims in India. And was that morally the right thing to do if Hindus were out there to destroy Islam and Muslims? Now, if they are doing it, who's responsible? Isn't it those who left them in India rather than inviting them to come and be in Pakistan? No such invitation was ever given. No. He's completely mum on that. He spoke about a transfer of population after the Bihar massacre of, I think, October 1946. But then somebody must have told him, Jinnah Sahab, what are you doing? If there is going to be an exchange of population, you get 35 million, they get only 6.5 million. Is that a good deal? And I tell you, at that time, Bengal being a part of Pakistan was not on the cards. This came only in April 1947. Up until then, the idea was that there will be a West Pakistan, and an East Pakistan, 2 states. This was joined on to Pakistan only in April. What happens is that Mukherjee, the Hindu Mahasabha leader, says that if India is going to be partitioned on the basis of religion, we want Bengal also to be partitioned. And Congress then supports that idea. When in 1940, Jinnah demanded the partition for Muslims in Northeast and Northwestern, the Sikh leader Sardar Sundar Singh Majithia of the Sikh Nationalist Party said, if the Muslims want to partition India on the basis of religion, the Sikhs will resist being part of a communal Pakistan. And we would then work towards those parts of Punjab to be given to either a Sikh state or to India. So if you look at all this, the partition was not a good solution for minorities. 30% Muslims, 70% Hindus, and the Hindus then having their own caste, divisions, all that would have been great to have a balance of all the communities. But now you have 80% Hindus in India with a Hindu right-wing party using majoritarianism to its advantage. And we have 4% Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs that we mistreat anytime we want with impunity. So the numbers are against the minorities.
Thank you so much, Professor Ishtiaq. With that, we conclude our questionnaire hour. And thank you so much, every person who asked the question. It was such a lively session. We move on towards the chair of today's discussion, Mr. Mukul Kesavan, for his valuable comments. Please, sir.
One of the most infuriating parts of a truly enthralling lecture is the chairperson in the end boring on with his summaries of what was actually said, which is entirely unnecessary because a good lecture needs no explication. I just want to say, though, that it's been a delight listening to this lecture because, in a curious way, listening to Professor Ahmed, it felt like a what might have been, this sense of a kind of pan-subcontinental patriotism, what this might have actually meant at its best. This kind of urbane, cosmopolitan, inclusive acceptance of difference. I think what we've seen in the course of this talk is two things. One, a series of myths being sort of elegantly punctured. The idea that there's a kind of revisionist history whereby we could argue that partition was in fact a process of bargaining, that it wasn't actually driven by a sense of ideological purpose. I think that's something that has been laid to rest. I know that Aisha Jalal's book, which is in some ways a tour de force, nonetheless rests on a very thin empirical basis. It was wonderful to hear this because a few years ago, there was a huge controversy within India when Professor Venkat Dhulipala published his book called The Creation of a New Medina, where he argued that in UP, the entire project for the entire Pakistan campaign was essentially based upon deeply religious and theological ideas. It's been a pleasure to actually listen to a talk which brings together many different things: a profound knowledge of the Punjab, a sense of the subcontinental high politics of India, of British India leading up to partition, and also an insight into the thinking of great men. I know that the history of great men has been somewhat out of fashion for a long time, but there is a sense in which politics cannot be understood without the politicians who practice it. And what we've seen in this wonderful conspectus of the lead up to partition, and then really, I think in the most poignant way, as Professor Ahmed said, the terrible, terrible solution that partition was as far as minorities in India was concerned, is a truly salutary lesson in how those who forget history are doomed to continuously repeat it. The fact that the subcontinent continuously reproduces this kind of majoritarianism that leads to ever more conflict and friction is one of the saddest and least redeeming parts of our history. But on a happier note, let me just say it's been a real privilege to have had the benefit of Professor Ahmed's extraordinary erudition. It is not very often that you have a scholar who speaks in a kind of extemporized way directly to an audience in sentences that are available and accessible to everyone. Professor Ahmed, we thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm overwhelmed by your kind words, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much, Professor Ahmed and Mr. Mukul Kesavan, for those lovely comments. And it every time just gives you goosebumps. Those who forget history are forced to continue repeating it. Next, I request Dilafroz to please unmute herself and also switch on her camera for the vote of thanks to Professor Ishtiaq and all of the people involved in making this lecture a success.
Good afternoon to all and all present here. I am Dila Froze, and it is my privilege to have been asked to propose the vote of thanks for this event. And at the outset, we thank the Subject Association of the Department of History and Culture for bringing us together for this event. And we thank our utmost gratitude to the Honorable Speaker of the event, Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed, sir. Sir, it was really wonderful to have you here enlighten us with your knowledge and expertise on one of the most important and widely debated topics of South Asian history. Thank you for making this event so vibrant and interactive, sir. Now, I'm grateful for our HOD, Dr. Farhat Nasreen ma'am, for her motivation and guidance. We'd also like to thank our Honorable Chair, Mr. Mukul Kesavan, sir, for gracing the event. It's always delightful to have you around us, sir. And we cannot thank enough our student coordinator, Dr. Roma Javed Rashid ma'am, for her consistent support. And I'd also like to thank all the professors and students of the Department of History and Culture for being a consistent support for us. Thank you to all the participants present here. Thank you, Moin Hakak, for being a wonderful host to us. And last but not the least, I'd like to thank the Morikeen members for organizing this event and making it a great success. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Wonderful having you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, ji. Thank you.
Okay, another one down. Done and dusted. Very well done.
So sorry
Why are you sorry, Moin?
for not being there on time. Everything just got so messed up. I was looking at my watch. I thought it's 1:15, and sorry, I thought it's 12:15, and it was 1:15 already. So that kind of messed my schedule. I'm so sorry, but I guess that well.
No, don't worry. I think this happens to the best of us. Doesn't really matter. You did a wonderful job of hosting the event. Dilafroz, thank you so much for that vote of thanks. It was wonderful. Arpita, Shiva, everybody else, and those of you who are here participating in the event, thank you very much. I think the question answer round today was really, really lively. बहुत अच्छे सवाल आए, बड़े अच्छे discussions हुए.